My name is Marissa. I was born and raised in a small town in Pakistan. I grew up in a Muslim family where traditions were strong and questions were not welcomed. As a girl, my dreams were simple. I wanted peace. I wanted a home where I could laugh without fear. I wanted love that did not come with conditions. But in my world, a girl's wishes were not important. My value was measured by how well I obeyed and how useful I was to others. I was married very young to a man chosen by my father. I barely knew my husband when I entered his house as a wife. He was not cruel, but he was weak. He could not stand against my father, even when he saw injustice. Still, I tried to build a life. I cooked, cleaned, prayed, and hoped. I told myself that patience was my duty. When I became pregnant, I felt a joy I had never known. For the first time, I felt that something good was growing inside me. I spoke softly to my unborn child at night. I dreamed of holding my baby, of finally having someone who would love me without fear. That child gave me strength in a house where I often felt small. But my pregnancy became a problem. My father did not like that I was settling into my husband's home. He wanted control. He wanted me back under his roof, not as a daughter, but as someone he could use. He began to visit often, speaking harshly, creating tension. He told lies about my husband. He made threats. Fear returned to my life. I did not know then that my pregnancy would become the reason for my deepest pain. I did not know that the people who were meant to protect me would harm me in ways I could not imagine. I was still hopeful, still trusting, still believing that family meant safety. This was the beginning of my breaking, and also the beginning of a journey I never planned, a journey that would lead me through darkness toward a light I did not yet know. As my pregnancy began to show, my father's visits became more frequent. He no longer came with greetings or concern. He came with anger in his eyes and sharp words on his tongue. He said my husband was unworthy. He said I was being neglected. None of it was true, but truth did not matter to him. What mattered was control. He began to speak to my husband privately. I later learned he was filling his ears with fear, telling him that keeping me would bring trouble, that our family would shame him, that I was a burden. My husband grew distant. He stopped looking at me the same way. Silence entered our home like a cold wind. One evening, my father came with my uncle. They said they were taking me to see a doctor because I looked weak. I was tired, yes, but I did not feel sick. Still, I was taught not to refuse my father. My husband stood there quietly. He did not ask questions. That hurt more than anything else. The clinic, things moved too fast. Papers were signed that I did not read. Words were spoken that I did not fully understand. I remember lying on a bed, my heart beating hard, fear rising in my chest. I wanted to leave. I wanted to scream. But my father was there, watching. His presence froze me. When I woke up, something inside me was gone. I felt empty in a way I cannot fully explain. A nurse avoided my eyes. My father said it was necessary. He said it was for my good. He said now I could come home with him. I cried silently on the way back. My body hurt, but my heart hurt more. The child I had spoken to, the child I had prayed for in my own way, was gone. No one asked how I felt. No one apologized. My pain was treated as a small thing. That night, I was taken from my husband's house. Not with kindness, but with force. I was told I was no longer welcome there. My husband did not fight. He did not follow. That silence became another wound. Back in my father's house, I felt trapped. I was not there as a daughter. I was there as someone owned. I began to understand that what happened was not about care or honor. It was about power. And I was powerless. I started to feel anger, confusion, and deep sadness. I questioned everything I had been taught about family, obedience, and faith. If this was righteousness, why did it feel so wrong? If God was pleased, why did I feel so broken? This betrayal marked me deeply, changed how I saw people and how I saw myself. I did not yet know that this pain would later push me to seek answers beyond what I had always known. After I returned to my father's house, life became very hard. I was no longer treated like a daughter who needed care. I was watched closely every day. My phone was taken. I was not allowed to visit friends. Even my movements inside the house were questioned. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. My body was still weak from what had been done to me. At night, I would wake up suddenly, holding my stomach, forgetting for a moment that my baby was gone. When I remembered, the pain returned fresh like it had just happened. I cried quietly into my pillow so no one would hear me. Crying openly only brought anger and insults. My father spoke to me harshly. He blamed me for everything. He said I brought shame. He said I was ungrateful. Sometimes his words were worse than physical pain. I began to feel worthless, like my life had no meaning. I asked myself many times why I was still alive. My mother saw my suffering, but she was also afraid. She would look at me with sad eyes but say nothing. In our home, fear ruled everyone. I learned that silence was not just a habit, it was a survival skill. I was forced to do heavy housework even when I was not well. If I complained, I was told to be quiet. If I rested, I was called lazy. I started to feel like I was disappearing, like the person I once was no longer existed. During this time, I began to think deeply. I thought about my baby, about my marriage, about my life. I wondered why obedience only brought pain. I wondered why God felt so far away. I prayed the only way I knew how, but my prayers felt empty, like words hitting a wall. One afternoon, while cleaning an old storage room, I found a small box of forgotten items. Inside were some old books left by a distant relative who had moved away years ago. Among them was a small book that was different from the others. I did not know much about it then, only that it spoke about love, forgiveness, and hope in a way I had never seen before. I was afraid to touch it but also curious. Something inside me felt drawn to it. I hid it carefully and waited for night. That small moment, finding that book, felt like a quiet turning point, though I did not understand it yet. At night, while everyone slept, I opened it slowly. The words were simple, gentle, and kind. They spoke to my pain without judging me. For the first time since I lost my child, I felt a small sense of comfort. I did not know it then, but this was the beginning of a new path, one that would slowly lead me out of darkness. That night I could not sleep. The house was quiet, but my heart was loud. I kept thinking about the book I had hidden. I was afraid someone would find it on me, but I was more afraid of losing the peace I felt when I first touched it. Slowly, carefully, I opened it again under my blanket. The words were easy to understand. They spoke about a God who sees the broken, who cares for the weak, and who does not enjoy pain. I read about love that is patient and kind. I read about forgiveness, not forced but healing. These words felt different from anything I had ever known. They did not sound like control. They sounded like care. As I read, tears came to my eyes, not only from sadness but from relief. For the first time I felt that someone understood my pain without blaming me. I felt like my heart was being gently touched, not pushed or threatened. I did not fully understand everything, but I understood enough to feel hope. I began to read a little every night. I hid the book carefully each morning before anyone woke up. During the day, when my father shouted or when the house felt heavy, I held on to the words in my heart. They became like a quiet light inside me. One night, while reading, I felt something I cannot fully explain. It was not fear. It was not confusion. It was a deep sense of being seen. It felt like God was near, not angry, not distant. He let me know that my pain mattered. He revealed to me that what happened to me was not love, and it was not His desire. I began to speak softly to God in my own words. Not the words I was taught to repeat, but words from my heart. I told Him about my baby. I told Him about my fear. I told Him how alone I felt. In those moments I felt comfort, even though my situation did not change immediately. I started to notice small changes in myself. I was still sad, but I was no longer empty. I was still afraid, but I was not hopeless. Something inside me was waking up. I began to believe that my life still had value. One day, my father noticed I was quieter than usual. He accused me of hiding things. My heart raced, but I stayed calm. Inside, I held on to the peace I had found. That peace became my strength. I did not know where this path would lead. I only knew that for the first time since my pregnancy was taken from me, I wanted to live. I wanted to understand this God who heals instead of harms. This growing faith became my secret, my shelter, and the beginning of my courage. As days passed, the peace I felt inside began to grow, but so did the battle around me. My father became more suspicious. He did not like the change he saw in me. I was no longer crying all the time. I no longer begged or argued. I was quiet, but not broken in the same way. That disturbed him. Inside me there was a struggle. Part of me was afraid of being discovered. Another part of me felt stronger than before. When my father shouted, my heart still beat fast, but inside I reminded myself that my life was seen by God. I was no longer invisible. At night I continued reading the book. Some parts were hard to understand, but many parts felt clear and kind. I learned that God is close to the brokenhearted. I learned that suffering does not mean a person is rejected. These ideas slowly changed how I saw myself. I was not cursed. I was not useless. I was hurt but still loved. I began to remember my baby in a new way. Instead of only pain, I felt a sense of trust. I believed that God cared for that child more than I ever could. This thought did not remove the sadness, but it softened it, helped me breathe again. One afternoon while washing dishes, I felt very weak and sat down. My mother came close and whispered if I was all right. I wanted to tell her everything, but fear stopped me. Still, she looked at me with concern, not anger. That small kindness meant a lot. Later that night, while praying quietly, I felt guided to forgive, not because what was done was right, but because holding hatred was destroying me. It was not easy. Forgiveness felt heavy and slow. But I understood that my healing depended on letting go, little by little. I began to ask God for direction. I did not know how I would escape this house or this control, but I trusted that a way would come. I learned that faith is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent strength. My situation had not changed yet, but I had changed. And that made all the difference. I was no longer only surviving. I was becoming alive again. As time went on, my father's behavior became more troubling. He began to control my life in ways that made me feel unsafe. He decided when I slept, when I ate, and where I stood. Sometimes he would stare at me in a way that made my heart feel cold. I did not understand everything at first, but I felt danger growing around me. I started to realize that he did not bring me back home to protect me. He brought me back to own me. This understanding shook me deeply. I felt betrayed again, but this time I was also alert. I became careful with my words and actions. I watched and listened. One evening, he told me plainly that I would never return to my husband. He said my life now belonged to him. My body froze. Inside I cried out to God for help. I felt fear like a heavy stone on my chest, but at the same time, I felt a quiet strength reminding me that this was not the life God wanted for me. That night I could not sleep. I held the book close and prayed silently. I felt guided to prepare myself, to be wise, and to wait for the right time. I understood that courage does not always mean running. Sometimes it means staying calm until a door opens. In the following days, I noticed opportunities. Neighbors visited. Relatives came and went. I spoke less and observed more. I began to see that not everyone agreed with my father, even if they were afraid of him. Hope returned slowly and carefully. One afternoon, a distant aunt visited. She noticed my sadness and asked gentle questions. I did not tell her everything, but I told her enough to let her know I was not safe. She looked shocked and promised to help if she could. That promise felt like a small light in a dark tunnel. Inside me, faith continued to grow. I no longer felt alone, even when I was surrounded by fear. I believed that God was watching over me, guiding each step, even when I could not see the full path. This was the season when truth became clear to me. I understood my past, my pain, and the danger of my present. But I also understood that my future was not finished. After my aunt visited, I held on to her words like a rope. I did not know when help would come, but knowing someone believed me gave me strength. I continued to live quietly, doing my duties, keeping peace on the outside. Inside, I stayed alert and prayed often. A few weeks later, my aunt returned with another woman from the family. They spoke to my mother privately. I could hear whispers through the walls. My heart beat fast. I did not know what was being said, but I felt that something important was happening. That evening, my mother came to me with tears in her eyes. She held my hands and told me that I would be leaving the house for a while to stay with my aunt. She said it was for my safety. Her voice was soft but serious. I could tell this decision was not easy for her. My father was angry when he heard. He shouted and made threats, but this time he was not alone. Other family members were present. He could not act the way he usually did. I stayed silent, looking down, but inside I felt a quiet relief. That night I packed a small bag. I took only clothes and the small book that had brought me hope. When I left the house, I did not look back. I felt sadness, fear, and relief all at once. I did not know where this new path would lead, but I knew I could not stay. At my aunt's house, life was different. It was not perfect, but it was safer. I was allowed to rest. I was allowed to speak. For the first time in a long while, I slept without fear. I thanked God quietly every night. During this time, my faith grew stronger. I read more, prayed more. I felt guided to trust God fully, even when my future was unclear. I began to believe that my life had a purpose beyond suffering. This was not the end of my struggle, but it was the beginning of freedom. A small door had opened, and I had stepped through it. Living in my aunt's house felt like breathing fresh air after being locked in a dark room. I was still afraid, but the fear no longer controlled every thought. I helped with chores, cooked simple meals, and slowly began to smile again. People spoke to me with respect. That alone felt new. At night, I continued reading and praying quietly. I felt God shaping my heart gently. He revealed to me that my pain did not define me. He let me know that my worth was not taken away by what others did. These thoughts gave me strength to stand again, even when memories returned. Sometimes sadness came without warning. I would remember my baby and feel tears rise. When that happened, I did not hide anymore. I let myself cry and then pray. I felt comfort in believing that God cared for my child and cared for me too. This belief helped me heal slowly. My aunt encouraged me to learn new skills. I began helping a neighbor with small sewing work. It made me feel useful. It made me feel hopeful. I started to imagine a future where I could stand on my own and make choices without fear. There were still threats from my father through messages and relatives, but they felt weaker now. I was not alone anymore. I felt guided to remain calm and patient. I believed that God was protecting me step by step. In this season, my faith became personal. It was no longer about fear or rules. It was about love, truth, and healing. I understood that following Christ was a journey of the heart, not force. I felt changed inside even though my life was still simple. This time helped me see clearly who I was becoming. I was no longer only a victim. I was a woman learning to trust God fully and walk forward with courage. As months passed, I began to feel a deeper sense of freedom. I still lived carefully, still avoided conflicts, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. I could pray openly, read the book without hiding, and speak to kind people who encouraged me. I felt God guiding me quietly, step by step. One afternoon, while helping a neighbor carry water, I had a strong feeling in my heart that I needed to forgive fully, not just the people around me but the pain itself. I felt God reveal to me that holding anger and fear would only keep me trapped. Slowly, I let go of bitterness toward my father, toward my husband for his silence, and even toward myself for feeling powerless. I understood that forgiveness did not make what happened right, but it made space for healing. With this new courage, I also began to think about my faith in a way I had never considered. I realized that the love described in the book, the love that sees, heals, and protects, was not just for the weak or the broken. It was for me too. I felt that God had been with me even in the darkest hours, even when I could not see or feel Him. He let me know that my life was valuable and that His love never left me. I started helping others quietly in my community. I encouraged young girls who felt trapped or afraid, and I shared my story in small, safe ways. Each time I did, I felt my heart grow stronger. I realized that my pain, as deep and as unfair as it was, had taught me courage, patience, and compassion. Though my father still tried to control things from afar, his power over me had lessened. I felt guided to make careful decisions about my life, trusting that God would lead me. I prayed for wisdom and for protection, and I began to understand that faith was not just about words. It was about living with trust, love, and patience. This stage of my life was where I truly began to become free, not only from the house, not only from fear, but from the chains of my own doubts. I began to see that my journey, painful as it was, had led me closer to God and closer to the person I was meant to be. Now, looking back, I see my life as a journey from darkness into light. The pain I endured, the betrayal, the loss of my baby, the fear, and the control was deep and real. But it also led me to something greater, a personal relationship with God that no one could take away. He let me know that even in my suffering, He had not abandoned me. He revealed to me that love, truth, and forgiveness are stronger than fear, anger, or oppression. I want to tell everyone, especially those who may be young or hurting, that your value is not measured by what others do to you, or by the pain you endure. Your life has meaning, and God sees every tear, every cry, every silent prayer. He hears you even when no one else does. He can bring hope into the darkest places of your life. I also learned that forgiveness is not a weakness. It is a gift you give yourself. When I forgave my father, my husband, and even myself for feeling powerless, I felt the chains of bitterness begin to break. I felt lighter, freer, and more able to follow God fully. Faith is a journey, not a moment. It requires patience, prayer, and trust. It requires studying His Word and letting it speak to your heart, not just your mind. It requires loving others, even when it is hard, and standing firm in truth and justice. To anyone reading my story, I encourage you. Love God with all your heart, love others with kindness, pray without ceasing, and let His Word guide your steps. Life will bring trials, and sometimes those trials will feel unfair, painful, and even cruel. But trust that God can turn even the deepest sorrow into a source of strength, wisdom, and hope. Today I live with courage, compassion, and faith. I share my story not for pity, but to show that no darkness is too great for God's light. He can heal, restore, and guide anyone who seeks Him with a sincere heart. Hold on to Him, and you will never walk alone.